Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook on this May 27th. Our Monday episode, because the Friday episode right now is lost in the ether for the time being. Hello, Arpon. How's it going today?
Good.
Yeah?
Good. Yeah. I mean, it's only so much we could say about the Canadiens right now at this stage of the offseason. There's
No
not a whole
kidding.
lot going on. They're probably working pretty hard behind the scenes, but a bit of a wait and see mode for the Canadiens right now. Obviously, enjoying watching the playoffs. But so we thought this week that we would do something, I guess, a little different in the sense that I gave Marc Antoine an assignment earlier this morning. We're all looking towards the draft and who the Canadiens could add, obviously, with number 5, and the number 26 pick, perhaps, if they actually use it. So we thought we'd do a little rundown of the Canadiens' current prospect pool, what they have, where their holes might be, and where things stand. You know, I had my colleague at the Athletic, Carey Price. We were talking about the possibility of the Canadiens taking a defenseman at number 5. We had a few questions in the mailbag to that effect. We discussed it in previous episodes. And his thing was like, why are the Canadiens so sold on their future on defense? Like, I look at that group, and not to say that it's bad, but they could use an infusion of a potential number 1 defenseman. And I thought about it. I was like, yeah, he's not wrong. But I think there are certain givens that the Canadiens are looking at in their prospect pool when trying to make decisions as to what pick they make and how they go about building their team. And I think one of the sure things that they feel they have, people might disagree, and I think they have a right to disagree, but they think they're pretty solid on defense. And they're kind of banking on that. So we're going to go through the prospect pool.
If that part goes wrong, everything's off the table. I mean, they got to at least hope that a few of their defensemen will pan out, because if it doesn't work on defense, it's not up front that'll save their ass, you know?
No, exactly, 100%. So, so before we get into our list, so what we did, so I asked Marc Antoine to make his list of his top 10 Canadiens prospects. I made my list.
Yeah.
We haven't seen each other's list, so we're going to reveal them one by one in front of you in real time, and so that we can get each other's reaction and kind of discuss how we decided to go. First, a couple of disclaimers. So we did not use what is kind of a standard criteria, I guess, for a lot of people use 100 games, 100 NHL games as the bar for when a player stops becoming a prospect or stops being a prospect. We decided to make that 50. And so James Struble is not going to be on either of our lists. Justin Barron, who's not quite at 100 but is way past 50, will not be on either of our lists. And obviously Juraj Slafkovsky won't be on either of our lists because he's played well over 100 games. But, you know, since he's 20 years old, I thought I would just do a little starting thing on Slav, so very briefly, if you don't mind. I didn't tell Marc Antoine I'd be doing this. But I was looking at I think I actually closed the window. But I was looking at Slav's production from December 15th onward, and who were some of the names that he was on par with. You know, he had 43 points in 53 games from December 15th onward. He was within a point of players like Andrzej Kopitar, Tim Stützle, Brad Marchand, Evgeny Malkin, Joel Eriksson Ek. Like, it was just a really impressive list of players that he was on par with from that date onward. And yes, it's a little over half a season. But still, I think considering how he started the season and considering how he maintained basically that same production, barring a tiny slump he had kind of in the middle of it, but basically remained pretty consistent from December 15th onward, played over 19 minutes a night from that point onward, all before turning 20, which he did in March, if I'm not mistaken. So he's not here. He's not on this list, but he is definitely obviously a big part. There's some players on this list who are actually older than him, so it's uh, it's something to keep in mind that the Canadians, the real jewel of the Canadians rebuild here for now, is this guy
Yeah.
who I thought was really impressive at the World Championships, despite not, lighting up the score sheet. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But he is definitely a big part that we're not going to be talking about right now.
Well, he's their flagship prospect, and that's why he was chosen first overall in this draft year. So that
Yeah.
makes sense, right?
Yes.
So the way I've done my list is that you have to look at the ceiling of the player. Obviously, his talent level, his ceiling, how much you can hope that he can accomplish. But also, I think the if that's the X on your scale, the Y axis is the probability of reaching that ceiling, and I think that's where there might be the most discrepancy between your list and mine. I don't know. I'm curious to see it, but
Yeah.
yeah. So because I think that there are some guys that are that have great skills or great hockey IQ, but for one reason or another, maybe less likely to reach the NHL and establish themselves and have a regular role, at least with the Montreal Canadiens, compared to guys that might have lower ceilings, but have a better chance at attaining that. So, so that's I think those are the parameters that I looked at in building my list. A couple of honorable mentions, because let's do from 10 to 1, because that way I think it'll build the momentum, I guess.
The suspense. Build the suspense.
Build the suspense, yeah. So a couple of honorable mentions, guys that did not make my list, but I thought of. I mean, low ceiling, but guy who could definitely make a career out of what he's got. I think that Florian Jacquet is not too far behind in the top 10. Philip Eriksson had a breakout season in Sweden. I think that same time next year he might be on that list. And a couple of unknowns, but obviously the goalie of Olokin has earned great reviews this season. I need more viewings to be able to forge my own opinion on the guy, but I think that's, if he's good, as some people among the Canadiens brass think he is, the Canadiens are in a good shape. And
could be their Shesterkin.
Could be, that's it. So, yeah. I mean, those three guys are, to me, honorable mentions, but they did not make the top 10. Are there guys on your part that you were hesitating and they didn't make the cut?
Well, I didn't hesitate so much, but they're not on my list, and I think they would be on a lot of other people's lists. So as you mentioned, I think projectability is a big factor for me in making this list. Jack Guy's not on the list, even though I do think he has a pretty projectable profile and has like an NHL style profile. Another guy who has a projectable profile who's not on my list, who I still think, even though he had a disappointing season, should be in the Canadiens' plans is Emil Heineman. So Heineman, sorry. He's not on my list. I don't know if he's on yours.
Nope.
And Sean Farrell is not on my list. He could make it.
Mm-hmm.
He could just as easily not. And I find it very hard to make a projection of him as an NHL player. He could prove me wrong, and because he really could. He has all the talent in the world and has a lot of drive, and his season was very much derailed by injury, and he was really starting to get going when his last big injury hit. So let's see, big season for him with Laval, but he is not in my top 10. So those are kind of the guys that I thought of that could have merited a spot that I didn't give them a spot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so who you got number 10?
My number 10 is Oliver Kapanen. And a guy who kind of fell off the radar, I think, a little bit, playing in Liga, but had a tremendous season in Liga. Obviously, a great start to his World Championships, but still the role he was playing on Finland showed the respect that he had gained with his season in Liga this year. In fact, he's going to Timrå in Sweden next year. Will provide another test and a higher caliber of play, or I'd say maybe higher is not fair, but a more projectable caliber of play from Liga when you're looking at the SHL compared to NHL. It's easier to make that transition. The Liga style is not an NHL style of play. It's practically a different game altogether. And so the fact he was able to produce offense in such a defensive-minded league was impressive to me. And I think he has created a projectable path for himself to the NHL as sort of a middle six, if not bottom six, two-way centerman with some offensive skills clearly and a potential future with this club.
Okay, well, I was at number 10. I went with Phil Mishar. So
okay,
I have him. I'm sure much lower than you do.
I have him at 9.
Oh, there you go.
So we're close. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mishar, I mean, when you choose, I mean, the fact that he's a first round pick, it's a label that any prospect will carry for a bit and prove to either be worthy of that higher pick, or at some point you have to reinvent yourself and move past the idea that you were a first round pick and make your way differently. But when it comes to Mishar, knowing how, right? I mean, what's 2 years after, you have a Canadiens brass who is hoping that they might have bigger guys. They went to this guy who's all about skill, but has
speed.
not managed. Oh, definitely speed. Although at the beginning of last year, his speed did not pop as much as it did the year before. But I don't think that his 2 years in Kitchener have been too convincing. I mean, he finished on a high note, producing all those assists on the power play during the playoffs, 16 points in 10 games. So that was noteworthy. But I found that I guess after a transition year where he arrived in Kitchener last year, I could understand that it might be different, adjusting to that level of hockey in North America. But this season, I was hoping a bit more from Mishar than being just barely more than a point per game player. So the fact that he's only 5'10" and that he doesn't, I feel like for all the skill that he's got, not only his skating, but his puck handling skills too, I would hope that it would translate to more than that. And I don't know, once he reaches the pros, if he's going to be able to find his way and use his skills to proper use. You just mentioned Sean Farrell before. Sean Farrell, I mean, there's a reason why he ended up being like a mid-round pick, despite the skill level and the IQ that he's got. Mishar, I don't know if he was on everybody's list as a first rounder, but I really hope that the Canadiens will be able to see more from him in the coming years. For the time being, he's on my list, but I don't have the same hope to see him pop, and that the Canadiens, with the way that they're currently built, may be able to find him a place on their top 9 just yet. So we'll see.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, he's 9 on my list, so we don't have to go too long on this. But I just think that the fact that he had a kind of a similar timing for his kind of dip in production, it was 2 years in a row. Coming out of the World Junior break, well, not break, but whatever, coming out of the World Juniors, sort of had trouble picking up where he left off. Had a good start again, so it's really. But I still think the toolkit's very interesting with him. It's just like when we're talking about projectability, that's why he's so low on my list, and I presume your list as well. Is he's going to need to. It's going to need to figure out his dimension in the North American pro game. And with Riley Kidney and Sean Farrell already in Laval, incorporating Mishar into that group, there's a coach there who still doesn't have a contract, but still Jeff will, until further notice, is the coach there, even though he's on an expiring deal, has serious reservations about having, 3 guys of that profile in his top 9. So we'll have to see how that works. So that's my number nine.
You refer to Farrell and to Riley Kidney, right?
And Meshar, adding Meshar to that group.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would be having all three of them in the lineup at once is going to there's going to be some challenges associated to that. At least that's what JF Holt thinks. Now, maybe skill and talent win out, but I think Riley Kidney spent the year learning. He's another guy who's not on my list. I don't know if he's on yours, but he'd be another honorable mention on my list. But Riley Kidney learned that there's different way. He's going to have to find different methods to let his skill shine. And that was a tough process for him. So Meshar's going to have to go through that process because Kidney quickly realized that he's not going to produce points in the same way or using the same methodology as he did in the queue, right? And Meshar is going to have to learn that. And I agree that, having a similar production for a second year in a row at the OHL level sort of left a lot of people wanting. I think people in the Canadiens organization are included on that list. So who did you have at number 9?
Well, I hesitated in putting him higher, but I've got Adam Engstrom at number 9. So it was tempting to put him higher than that. Engstrom, I think, is a very enticing prospect. I mean, he played regular minutes in the SHL in his draft plus 1 year. Ended up playing top pairing with Rogla this year. Second for points among all the under 23 defensemen in Sweden, behind Joel Nystrom. I think that this guy has got a very interesting package. Again, the translatability of the game might be an issue, and I look forward to seeing him in Laval. But he's a guy who's been able to generate a lot of scoring chances. I mean, scored only 4 goals, but it's really his shooting percentage was unusually low. But I think that he's a guy that, again, he's rather big, right? He's over 6'2". I find that he's a guy who's got great mobility and also seems to be able to move the puck in tight spaces, which is not necessarily always the case for defensemen. But he's the only hesitation I have is that there's still a lot of defensive work to be done. But you see the steps that Logan Mailloux has taken this year in Laval. And I'm intrigued to see now with Kelly Buchberger leaving, he's going to be replaced. We don't know if JFO is going to be back, but we know for sure that the Laval Rocket is going to have a new defense coach. So I'm curious to see if the person who succeeds to Buchberger will be able to continue with the development of those young defensemen, offense-oriented defensemen such as Mailloux and also Engstrom. But I think that this is a guy who showed a lot of promise since his draft year, and I'm sure that if it was to be done again, he would be drafted much earlier than the 3rd round.
Yeah, I had Engstrom at 7. I agree with everything you just said, and I think at each of the last 2 training camps, he has jumped out. He has been extremely noticeable every time he's been around NHL caliber talent or NHL prospects. I'm including development camps in there. He has stood out to me. Just and the season, and not only that, but Rogla went on like a Cinderella playoff run where they had to play in the play-in round and then went on all the way to the final, right? So they had an incredible run. He played an important role in that. All of that is encouraging in a league that is probably the second best league in the world right now. I don't know. The KHL is still pretty good, but I think the quality of the KHL has gone down, and I think the SHL is up there. And so for him to perform in that environment, and as you mentioned, the second leading scorer among U22 defensemen this year, had similar point per game numbers as Axel Sandin Pellikka, who's obviously a first round pick last year. I think there's a lot, the frame, the poise, decisions with the puck. There's a lot there to like, and like you, I am very intrigued to see him at the AHL level next year.
Yeah.
But he's my seventh.
Okay. There you go.
So I'll go for my number 8 now, and my number 8 is Bogdan Konyushkov.
Okay.
I don't know if he's on your list, but
Nope.
he's not on your list. So this is a long play, right? But in terms of projectability, what I just said about the KHL is true, but what's also true of the KHL is young defensemen don't generally get a whole lot of attention or time. He was on a team that actually also included Anton Salayev, and so they were on the same defense corps. So obviously, they don't care so much about that. But you look at all-time U22 defense production in the KHL. So basically, career points under the age of 22 in the history of the KHL, and Konyushkov is third. And he's third, having done so in 2 seasons. First on the list is Alexander Nikishin, who is a Carolina Hurricanes top prospect, and they're hoping to get him over as soon as possible, and really looks like a stud defenseman.
It's considered the best defenseman outside the NHL, probably.
That's it. So he had 75 points in 4 seasons before his under 22 time. So he played in the KHL quite young. Another one who did is Maxim Chudinov, who played from 2008 to 2012 in 4 seasons, 72 points. And third on that list with 53 points in 129 games is Bogdan Konyushkov, and he's done that in 2 seasons. So there's a lot. He's locked into his deal, I believe, for 2 more years. So the Canadiens are in no rush to bring him over. His coach for Torpedo is Igor Larionov, as we mentioned, concerning Salayev, and he's been, he was named captain of the team this year. So it's quite an intriguing prospect to me, and I think he is a candidate to come out of the KHL and step right into the NHL, based on just how many games he will have played at that high of a level. Now, will the Canadiens have room for him on their defense corps by then? Maybe not. But, it's a right shot D. He's not the biggest guy, 6 foot, 170 pounds, but has found a way to not only survive but thrive in a very difficult environment, a very difficult league, playing a ton of minutes. So I think he's a very, very intriguing prospect for the Canadiens.
All right, that's good. I like that. That's good.
Who's your number 8?
Yeah, I messed up, man. I messed up because I realized that my list has 9 names instead of 10.
Jeez.
Yeah, I cut one guy too many. So I cut it number 9.
It was a very simple assignment.
I know.
Come up with 10 names. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll bump everybody up and put Emiliano in on number 9 and number 10. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay, sure. All right. So
because he was He was
your last cut?
He was my last cut. Yeah.
Okay. So Emil Heineman at number 10. All right. So that means you have Meshar at 9.
Yeah, and Engstrom at 8.
And Engstrom at 8. Okay, so our Engstrom is actually closer than it seemed. Okay. Yeah. Well, tell us why Heineman ultimately makes your list at the last second, but is on the bubble, and why he's, I could talk about why he's not on my list.
Well, I think to me it's like a last chance. I think that he's got such a package that can be useful at the NHL level. The key for many players is understanding who they are and what can make them successful. And sometimes young players will have an idea of how they've been successful in the past and how they can be successful in the future. It doesn't always mesh. So I think that Heineman has a toolkit that's really fitting for the pro game. it's taking a bit longer than we hoped, but the fact that he can be so good on the forecheck, that he can be good along the boards, that he's got a great shot, and he's not the worst player defensively either. I think that he's got at least a good enough toolkit to be part of your third line. The issue is that as teams get better and better, players that used to be good enough to play on your second line, if your team improves, they're going to be pushed down to the third line. So there's going to be a lot of guys that are competing for jobs as third liners. And the Canadiens also have an issue with veterans that are already there and that are there for the next little while. I'm thinking of Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher, guys that will be like established NHLers in their bottom six, which will make things harder for certain young players to really be given the proper shot. So Heineman is going to need to be really standing out in the first half of next season in order to really show that he's deserving of that chance. He's had a cup of coffee very briefly with Montreal this year. It was not very convincing, but I think that ultimately he's a guy who will find a way to he will find his niche in the NHL. So I don't see necessarily a ton of a very high ceiling with him, but he could be a guy that that provides secondary offense that's good on your second power play, and who could be just a smarter, grittier version of. Well, you see, the Canadiens are about to let go, I think, of Jesse Ylönen, right? I don't see much of a future for him. He's a tweener. And I think that one of the reasons why he remains a tweener is that he's not involved all the time, and he doesn't use his best assets to the best of his capability. And I think that Heineman has something more that will enable him to be more than a tweener. And he could be, for example, because what made me think of Ylönen was the fact that, he could have been a second power play type of guy. But I see in Heineman, because of his nice trigger, a guy who could at least help in that department. And so, yeah, but I mean, to me, it's the last. Next year is going to be a make or break season for him. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, he's 20. He'll be 23 in November. Yeah, so he's kind of starting to hit that range where you got to see something. One thing that you mentioned, guys have to be self-aware. Like, he has that. He is self-aware. He is aware of what he needs to do with his various skills and tools to play in the NHL. I think he doesn't have any kind of delusions of becoming a top line winger in the NHL. I think he knows what he'll be, and is working on, the wall skills and all those things that he frankly did well in Sweden, before coming over here. That those are the kinds of things that are going to get him there. So yeah, this is, and again, he was just off my list, but
yeah,
I still think he's an interesting kind of depth piece looking down the line. I look at a guy like Luosterainen in Florida,
right,
who took a little longer and who had to figure some things out, but kind of accepted who he was going to be and decided, I'm just going to be really good at that. Obviously, he's a center and it's a winger. There's differences there, but really settled into a role. Identified a role that he could play on a really good team and played really well in that role and carved himself a space. I think Heineman's going to have to do something like that pretty soon. Okay, so we have my 7. My 7 is Engstrom. So now we're at your 7.
My 7's Owen Beck.
You know what helps? You know what helps when you make these lists is if you number the players, then you know how many players are on your list.
Thanks, man.
Okay.
I should. Yeah. Next time is going to be an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So your 7 is Owen Beck. I have him at 6. So let's hear it.
Yeah. I debated between Kapanen and Beck. To me, they're pretty much on par. For different reasons. Obviously, they're not the same age, but I look at Owen Beck, and I'm seeing a guy who is deemed as an important piece for two teams that thought that they had a good chance of going far in the playoffs. So it's his second visit at the Memorial Cup in 2 years. Quite impressive. To me, it's a matter of offensive upside, though. People got, I think, a bit carried away when he first, he first had his first training camp with Montreal, and he showcased all sorts of offensive flashes right from the get-go. But it might have created some unrealistic expectations in terms of his real offensive potential. I look at him as someone who could eventually, replace Jake Evans. So, which is fine. I think that he's a guy that screams NHL player all day long for me, but it's just a matter of keeping our expectations at the right place. And, so if he can be a third line center, that'd be great. If he's one of the league's best fourth line center, that'll be okay. But at least I think that the Canadiens can look at this guy and say he's going to play for us, and that's already a win. Because we go through that list. There are some guys that have higher ceilings, but you don't have the same feeling, the same assurance that they're going to play for your team one day.
Yeah, I had Beck at 6, significantly higher than Kapanen. I put him on a level above Kapanen personally. I think his floor is to replace Jake Evans as a fourth line center. I think his ceiling is higher. Yes, I agree the offensive upside might not be as high as people maybe expected at first, but I think it's there. I think there is some. When Martin St. Louis keeps saying that there's offense in Jake Evans' games, well, one day when he says it about Owen Beck, we'll actually be able to believe him because it is there, I think. He has a great shot. I'm not saying he's going to light the world on fire, but he could be a guy. I see him as a guy who could play a very important two-way role on a third line, and not just be a checker. Two-way being, two-way is taken to mean now defensive play, but I like to see it as literally two-way. Like that he helps on the offensive end and he helps on the defensive end, be a face-off guy, and then obviously a penalty killer, probably not a power play guy, but still a contributor, a key contributor to a bottom six. And to me, I think that's a realistic projection. Like his high end would be a second line center. I don't think that's really all that realistic at this point. But so I had him a little bit higher than you on my list, but significantly higher than Kapanen, who I still think, while this season was very encouraging from him, and I said much the same things about him. I just feel the track record for Beck is a little stronger, and that he's a bit more likely to reach his ceiling than I think Kapanen will. So that's that's perfectly fair. As for it's just earlier that when you described Kapanen, you said that he was able to produce offense in a defensive league and that he had a ceiling of a middle six centerman. To me, that places him, in my view, above Beck. That being said, I might be guilty of recency bias to a certain extent. I agree with that. If you took Kapanen from he's a year older than Beck. I mean, the Kapanen from a year ago, was he significantly better than Beck? Probably not. But I mean, among the players that are under 21 in Finland, he was the sixth scorer in the league. He had 34 points in 54 games. But especially, I mean, it's not only the second half of the season, but especially the playoffs. I mean, he was tied for first in Liga with 14 points in 13 playoff games. That, I guess, earned him that invitation to the men's team at the World Championships. So, I mean, and at the World Championships, I know the goals he scored were against lesser teams, and when the competition heightened, he was all of a sudden he didn't produce as much. He was a fringe power play player for them. That's okay. But I think, to me, it's at least
by putting them roughly on par, it shows the need for the Canadiens probably to add more depth at center. Because when you look at basically what they've got in their pipelines, it bolts down to Kapanen and Beck.
Oh yeah, they're the only two centers. Yeah. Well, Jackeye. I mean, if Florian Jackeye could play center, which he could, he did play center much of his young life. It was really last season where he was moved to the wing when he made the OHL kind of late.
Yeah.
So you have Kapanen at 6, correct? Am I guessing that
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
So we've reached. So I have Beck at 6. So we've reached kind of. So let's just run down our list so far. So I have Kapanen 10, Meshar 9, Konyushkov 8, Engstrom 7, Beck 6.
I got
and you.
Heineman 10, Meshar 9, Engstrom 8, Beck 7, and Kapanen 6.
Okay. So now we get into the top 5. Here we go.
And that top 5, well, let's mention that. To me, there is such a clear distinction between the top 5 players and the rest of the pipeline.
Yeah,
we talk a lot about the Canadiens having a lot of quantity, even more than quality, and that's true because there's a lot of, the number 10 could have been, the number 10 spot could have been used by a bunch of different guys that are enticing prospects, and they're each in their own way. But the real quality is really in that top 5, I think.
Yes, no, absolutely. And even then, there are question marks. I don't know. On my list, I assume our list is going to be pretty similar. Maybe the order will be different, but there are some question marks on all of these guys. So at 5, I have Jacob Fowler.
So do I.
Okay, well there you go. I think they're going to be pretty similar from here on in. So, Jacob Fowler. The only question is that he's a goalie, and goalies take longer, and college success is no clear indicator of NHL success. Everything we've seen from him from the moment the Canadiens drafted him, and even prior to that, his exploits with Youngstown in the USHL suggest that the Canadiens have themselves a gamer here. He's and as soon as he gets his conditioning at a higher level, but
he already has,
and which he already has, right? But until it reaches like an NHL level, I mean,
right?
It's like the compete is there, the battle is there, the competitiveness, the raising your game at the appropriate moments in games, and the notion of making the important save, all of that is there with him. And so, I think they have a potential number 1 goaltender there. But the two things are that A, you never know. B, if he is, he's probably realistically 5 years away from being that. So that's a long time. A lot of things can happen in that span. But everything we've seen so far is seems like he's a guy that fills what was a glaring hole in the Canadiens pipeline. Yeah.
Although I'm curious, the jury's still out there when it comes to Jakub Dobeš. Probably not as a number 1 goalie, but as an NHL goalie, I think he could develop, he made
excellent strides over the course of the season. I mean, you compare him at the start of the year to the end of the year. Yeah, those are two different goalies. So
yeah, but I mean, with Dobeš, that could help make that transition. Although you already have Primo there, and it's not as if Montembeault is old either. So they have a transitional period going on. And to me, the fact that Fowler might take 4 or 5 years, it's no big deal. It's to be expected anyway when it comes to a goalie. So you have to. It's very seldom you'll have guys that enter the scene 2 years after they were drafted. It's almost nowadays you don't see that anymore. And another guy who really has established himself in the past year or two is Jeremy Swayman, but he spent 3 years at the University of Maine. And he had a successful college career. It was a 4th-round pick by the Bruins. So that's the other thing. You don't need to be necessarily the highest draft pick among goalies. Now we mentioned over different times in this season about the progression or the rebuild in Detroit. And you mentioned more than once how the Red Wings traded up to trade Sebastian Cossa. And they could have drafted Jesper Wallstedt instead, and they did not. And, I'm happy. If I'm Montreal, I'm happy to have Jacob Fowler and have a Logan too in Russia, instead of having spent the 1st-round pick on Sebastian Cossa in the past, So
Right. And even in that draft year, I mean, what was he? He was the 4th goalie taken? 1, 2. No, fifth
not
goalie
the fifth.
taken. 5th goalie was Adam Gajan at 35, Robel at 38, Augustine at 41, Bjarnason at 51, and then Fowler at 69.
And wasn't there there wasn't a Clara also before?
Oh yeah, Clara at 60. Sorry, yeah. So there you go. So I think the Canadiens are pretty happy with that. And they this is another case of them making their decision on the goalie that they wanted, and then properly identifying when the appropriate time was to draft him.
Yeah.
They had to have had some sense that Chicago, Arizona, Philly, and Anaheim were looking somewhere else for their goalie, because that's one thing that obviously that's the most striking thing that comes out from the Canadiens draft video is the debate over Fowler between at their scouting meetings, Billy Ryan and Vincent Riando getting somewhat heated. I don't want to overstate it, but arguing about it in a healthy way, and then just coming to the decision that Fowler, the winner, was the one that they wanted. So that's a good read by them to know that, and that allowed them. That allowed them to trade their 2nd-round pick in the Newhook deal,
right?
Because they weren't overly concerned about Fowler not being there when they picked at 69. So
there was a run for goalies. You remember last year at the Combine we interviewed Michael Rabal, and it didn't feel as though the Canadiens were all that into him.
They didn't. I don't think they were into his draft slot. I don't know if they actually disliked him as a goalie. They just disliked using that pick on him.
Time. Yeah.
That was. And they didn't ultimately.
Yeah. Fowler, it bears mentioning that he set an NCAA record this season for wins by a freshman with 32. Of course, he was playing for a powerhouse in Boston College. It's still going to be a powerhouse probably next year, because they're going to have the Higgins brothers coming in, and James is going to be in all likelihood the
number 1 pick,
the number 1 pick in 2025. So they're still going to be a great team, but when it's
I think Leonard's coming back. No, I think Ryan Leonard has mentioned he's probably heading back, and I just saw something this morning that Will Smith apparently is going to sign with San Jose. So they're losing him, but they should have Perreault back. They should have Leonard back. They should have the Higgins brothers. They should be strong again.
But it's an offense-oriented team, offense-minded team. So it doesn't make the goalie's job necessarily easier. You might see less pucks because the guys spend a lot of time in the other zone, but you might see your fair chances of high scoring chances also. So anyway, I don't want to diminish what Fowler did. He was
and I think having Fowler back there allows them to play that stuff. They don't have to worry too much about and plus he played like every game practically. So just as an aside, the pick that the Canadiens traded to Colorado, obviously Colorado flipped to Tampa Bay in the Ross Colton deal, and they took Ethan Gauthier at 37, and Rabal went 1 pick later at 38. So if they really liked Rabal, they would have had to use that pick on him. They wouldn't have been able to make the Newhook trade. So I think the fact that they identified Fowler and properly diagnosed or properly deduce that he would be available at 69 is a good call by them.
Right.
Okay, let's go to number 4.
All right, I got Logan Mailloux at number 4.
I got Logan Mailloux too. This might be boring. This top 5 might be a little boring.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
Logan Mailloux as well.
Well, I really like the package that this kid offers, because I think that the balance of the level of aggressiveness plus the offensive aspect, I think, and the fact that he's got that size too, I think that it brings something different to that decor in the organization. He's got, I think that he's got a package that, rightfully so, would be interesting for many teams. And it's funny because when I spoke to Paul Byron towards the end of the season, he said that he thought that he could end up being the steal of the draft at a big price. The former management paid a big price for that steal, but now I think that for Gorton and Hughes to have him in the fold, that's pretty good. I'm curious to see though how far. Some see him as probably the most ready prospect in terms of NHL duty. I don't know if compared to Reinbacher and Hutson how it's going to really express itself next fall. But in any case, I don't think that even if he wasn't to start the season in Montreal, I think that he's going to see his fair bit of NHL action next year, and it shouldn't be too long before he becomes. Before he becomes a regular in the NHL. And the pipeline, being so rich in defensemen, I also think that he would be in a good situation where he could be eased in. So you don't necessarily precipitate, A, the time that he becomes an NHL player, and B, the level of responsibilities that you give him. Like, you could keep him in your third pairing for quite a while, let him take his reps, get comfortable with, or at least get used to NHL pressure in his own end, things like that, and being able to make quicker reads also, because it's already one thing to do it at the AHL level, but he's going to be having even less time and space at the NHL level, so there will be an adjustment there for him, and I think that this is the one thing that is most significant when it comes to Logan Mailloux, and the biggest adjustment you'll have to make. But they have the leeway and the personnel and the situation there so that they don't have to rush him in any way. I'm sure that there are teams out there who don't have a better D prospect than Logan Mailloux, and we both have 2 above him on that list, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do have leeway. I do, I do think Kent Hughes in particular is very cognizant of how messages can be received by their young players, having been an agent for as long as he was and having fielded calls from as many young players who maybe got sent down and didn't feel they deserved it and things like that. So he's very sensitive to that. Doesn't mean he's going to just put a kid on the NHL team just to spare his feelings, But I mean, if you're Logan Mailloux, you tell yourself, well, I was named, I went to the All-Star game. I played a big role on the team all year, showed progression, put up very good offensive numbers. Like, what more do I need to do to make an NHL roster? And what more do I have to prove at the AHL level? Now, I think there's aspects of his defensive game that he does need to improve that might ultimately find himself back in the AHL at some point, but I would not be the least bit surprised if he opened the season with the Canadiens as an acknowledgement. It's assuming he has a good camp, obviously, as good of a camp as he had last year, frankly. I mean, he had an excellent training camp. So it wouldn't surprise me if he started, and then if he had some trouble that he went back at some point. But, I think sometimes you have to play in that environment to learn how to make those reads.
Right.
And you're not going to learn that in the AHL because the reads are different. The reads are not the same. Things come at you at a very different pace in more of a structured environment, and you have certain responsibilities in that structure, and those are things sometimes you just have to learn at the AHL level, and this is an argument that's going to apply to the 2 defensemen that are above him on this list as well. The Canadiens are going to have to do that dance a little bit, the way they planned on doing 2 seasons ago when they had Caden Gooley and Jacky and they were worried about how young Medi was, and they were planning on shuffling him back and forth to Laval. Ultimately, that didn't happen, but I think they might get that chance this year. But Mailloux, to me, is barring a disastrous training camp, it's probably earned a spot on the team to start the year, especially with the situation being what it is on the right side if Gooley moves back over to the left, especially.
Really? Huh? Well, as Owen Nelson would say, wow. Okay, I wouldn't go as far as you do, but
we'll see.
Well, that training camp's going to be so much fun on defense.
It's going to be wild.
We got a number 3.
Number 3, I have Joshua Roy.
Okay.
Yeah. I have him at 3 just because, well, to me, he's a top 6 forward talent eventually in the NHL. His smarts, his ability to position himself properly, be always in the right spot. He provides excellent support. He's just the ideal complementary player. And as soon as I watched him play in the World Junior Championships with Connor Bedard and complete him as well as he did, started that tournament far further down the lineup, worked his way up, could not get moved off that spot once he was there. And he is just a better package, but the same principle as Raphael Harvey-Pinard when he filled in with Nick Suzuki during that injury-ravaged season and put up all those goals. I see Joshua Roy as a guy who has those complementary instincts where he makes good players better and is able to play with them, and that's a skill that not everyone has. He has that. He understands how to play off them very well. Yeah. But on top of that, he has the pure offensive tools that maybe Harvey-Pinard does not, to sustain himself in a role like that. So I think he's a tremendous forward. He's a really good forward pro. He's not elite. He's not gonna. I doubt he's ever gonna be a top scorer or whatever. But he's a really solid offensive piece that I think will be able to play with a number of different players and will be a very versatile player for this team for many years.
Yeah. I think that the one thing that might prevent him, I had him at 2, by the way.
Okay.
I have Hutson at 3.
Okay.
But let's go, let's discuss these. It doesn't make sense, the order at this point. Let's just go player by player.
We've given away our number 1 too, so we might as well just go through it all. Yeah. So
when it comes to Roy, I think that the only drawback is his skating. He's fully aware that he's not the best skater, that he's never going to be the best skater, and probably that's the one thing that might not make him a potential first-line player. But I think that at his best, he's going to be a good second line winger in the NHL. Tons of smarts and a good understanding of what needs to be done to be effective in this league. The amount of work that he's put on since he had this illumination that basically the Canadiens were banking on and that were hoping for when they traded him in the fifth round. That happened. Sometimes you want those home run picks. You want the one element, the one question mark that hangs over the head of a prospect. You say, if he could only figure it out, then he could unlock all of his potential. Well, the Canadiens are lucky because Joshua Roy figured it out not too long after his draft, and now he's become a smart professional, doesn't take things for granted, who remains hungry for more, and plays a very responsible game. And he seems to be very, very low maintenance too. Martin St. Louis, every time that he's spoken about him, it's not like, oh my God, I've got so much work to do with this guy, and it doesn't seem to be a chore one little bit to coach this kid.
C'est un joueur de hockey.
C'est un joueur de hockey. He doesn't play hockey. Yeah. He's a hockey player.
Yeah.
I still need to ask Marty if he's got guys who play hockey on his team,
Yeah,
or if
you're not going
they're
to get a
all
straight.
hockey
I think
players.
there are. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to get an honest answer to that. But the other thing with Roy is
Yeah.
that I agree that he's probably more of a second line player, but I think based on what I mentioned before, he does provide the option to strengthen your second line by putting him on the first line and have someone else. And in this case, it would be to have him play with, say, Suzuki and Caulfield if you needed to drop Slav down to play with Doc. And I don't think he would look out of place playing with those two guys. Like, he would probably do pretty well based on what we've seen. So he does, for a coach to have a guy like that, like, you could play him on a third line and he could probably do that too. So
That's probably where he's going to be next season.
Exactly. So it's, I think he's a very kind of malleable piece for the coaching staff in Montreal to kind of work with.
Yeah. So I had Hutson at number 3.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I have met too.
No doubt that the talent is through the roof. The pure, in terms of just a pure talent, pure skill, he's ranked number 1 in my books. The only thing is that there's a risk that he might not pan out. It's as long as we haven't seen him play a full season, if not 2 full seasons, we won't know. We know though that he's got the smarts to make it work. That he's got the great intuition to find lanes. That his edge work and his mobility makes it so that even though he's not the fastest skater, he's an extremely agile skater. He can evade coverage that way. Smart. He's smart when it comes to defending with his stick a lot. I think he's going to be more than okay. But my only hesitation is that we don't know yet. And there's a level of risk that I find is both higher than for Joshua Roy in his own way and higher than in Reinbacher's way too. So Reinbacher might not have the flashy tools that Hutson has, but there's a blue chip element to what he brings to the table.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I had him at number 2, just because in this case, I allowed the ceiling to overtake the projectability. Projectability is obviously a question, but he has the most star potential in the group. I mean, that's the reality of it, is that he has a lot of it, and his ceiling's so high that the low floor, I'm willing to look past it in this instance, just because the Canadiens don't have this tantalizing package in their pipeline. So yeah, that's why I chose him at 2, and it's purely ceiling based. It's the only case where I kind of deducted projectability to in favor of the ceiling.
Do you see him in Montreal or in Laval next year?
I've grappled with this. You watch AHL games, and you watch high talent players play in the AHL, and sometimes a guy like that who needs guys around him that will be able to read off him, that will be able to be in the right spot so that he can find them, that can adjust to sort of the crazy things he does. I have difficulty thinking that you'll get the best out of him playing him in the AHL.
Yeah.
You're more likely to get the best out of him in the NHL. So from a purely development standpoint, I honestly think he'd be better off in the NHL. That his game wouldn't translate as well to the AHL as it would to the NHL, where the predictability of his teammates and his teammates' ability to read off him and their hockey IQ would benefit him. So I don't know what they're going to do, and it could just become a numbers situation. But I have a feeling that even if they do send him to the AHL, he won't be there for very long.
Mm-hmm.
Either he's going to dominate and it's going to seem ridiculous that he's there, or they're quickly going to realize that he's not benefiting from that sort of that style of hockey that that sort of that big brain hockey that Lane Hutson plays is not exactly the kind of hockey that gets played in the AHL.
I tend to agree with you when it comes to playing with guys that are talented enough and who understand enough what he wants to do. And for that reason, the NHL would be the best place for him. I could see a situation where he starts in Montreal, and at some point in his development and in his rookie season, if he falters at any point or things get difficult at any point, they could send him down to the American League to work on those specific aspects, saying to him, just the way that they've been saying about other guys, well, we know he can do this, this, and that. We know he can provide offense. He'll be fine. Now, there are other aspects that we need him to work on. And if he goes down to the American League at Christmas, let's say, to work on specific defensive aspects that he'll recognize, that he'll focus on, he probably won't feel the need to put up 2 points every game and be like this difference maker offensively. That's who he is. That's what he wants to be. But maybe that, if he recognizes what he needs to work on at the NHL level because he's experienced it first, going down after to the American League to work on those specific things that be more a tune-up rather than anything else could help him. But I think I would be surprised if they gave him the opportunity to see what he's got right from the get-go and try to, maximize his talent by making him play with the best players he possibly can be paired with.
The other factor in that question is what they're going to do this summer with their defensemen. How many of these defensemen will be at training camp? So it could just be a situation where there's so many bodies, they almost have to send him to Laval. So and it's they can't send Harris to Laval anymore. They can't, and I don't think there would be any purpose to that. I mean, maybe Struble would kind of miss out on a job in camp, but it's another factor that if they're not able to kind of alleviate the logjam on defense, that just a pure numbers game and just him being as young as he is and making his real professional debut here, the Canadiens could say, listen, we're stuck. We're going to have to send you to Laval and we need to make some room for you up here. And sorry, that's just how it is.
Well, the draft is in a month to the day, a month from now. So I suspect we might have answers on that log jam about a month away from now. So we'll see. Okay, so Roy and Hutson, respectively, 3-2 or 2-3. So that makes Reinbacher number 1 on both of our lists. I'll let you go first on Reinbacher.
Well, I mean, with Reinbacher, it's the projectability that takes precedent because he's watching him play in the AHL, it's pretty obvious to me that he doesn't need time in the AHL. I think some people would disagree. To me personally, I don't think he needs more time in the AHL. And the projectability of his game is through the roof. Like, the ceiling might not be through the roof. Ceiling is perhaps even lower than Hutson's, but that projectability is so strong, and people hate this notion of having a high floor player. I think that's what a lot of people hated about the pick. Those who were upset by it because they saw high ceiling players that were available, and the Canadiens went with the high floor guy. Well, personally, I think his ceiling is probably higher than a lot of people give him credit for, and that floor is so high that it just, to me, he does so many of the things that young defensemen have trouble doing well already. Doing a lot of the background on him, talking to people in Switzerland about him, and just his devotion to being better. Like, we often say that Marty St. Louis is going to love working with Lane Hutson. I personally think he's going to love working with David Reinbacher. Like, he is that kind of guy who's always looking at little details, what he can do better, and this and that. And once he gets comfortable in the NHL, he's going to facilitate offense. Like, the big knock on him is that his offensive ceiling's low. And maybe from a production standpoint, it's very similar to Goulet in that sense, in that getting the puck back and getting it up ice is part of offense. It might not result in assists or goals, but it results in your team scoring goals and your team producing assists and your team producing scoring chances. So it's, to me, he's going to be, I think, the type of defenseman that, while he won't maybe be an award-winning guy, he's the type of guy that you win with.
Yeah,
you need a guy like that on defense to win, and I think the Canadiens have that. He's super young still. I don't know if he'll start the season in Montreal. Again, that could be a numbers situation, but I think, and Jeff Fool made this point at the end of the season. Like, he was like, look at what having just a few games in the AHL did for Struble. It made a world of difference, and he thought that Reinbacher having those 11 games in the AHL will have a similar effect, where he's not, that might be his AHL time. And so, but the gap control, the defensive instincts, the aggression, the puck movement, not necessarily with his feet, but looking up, hitting guys in stride, getting the forwards, the puck,
the poise, in all three zones. Yeah.
All of it. He's a very polished player, and it's not going to wow you. He's basically the opposite of Lane Hutson. He's big, he's strong. He's not going to wow you, but he's effective, and has learned a valuable lesson that the simplicity of his game is its strength, and that he doesn't have to be like Lane Hutson. He doesn't have to be like Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar or whatever. He can just be the type of player he is, and the Canadiens will be better for it. And he's already, and that's probably the most important thing that happened this season for him, out of all the chaos and all the coaching changes and losses and injuries and everything. I would argue the most important thing for him was to learn that the Canadiens drafted you because of this. Just do that, and do that well, the way you have, and you'll be fine. And he's accepted that, and he realizes that now. And so that was the whole exercise in Switzerland this year, was probably worth it just for that, for him to realize that and embrace that and carry that into what I think will be his rookie season in the NHL.
Well, I'm glad he had the chance to finish his season in Laval, though. He couldn't come to North America fast enough, once the season was done in Cloton. And I wish things had gone differently for him over there. But I think that there's when you say the Canadiens have a good polished player in Reinbacher, I agree totally. And to me, it's just a question: is he going to be a first pairing defenseman or a second pairing defenseman? A second pairing defenseman is already a high floor. Then it just becomes a question of, would you have drafted a second pairing defenseman with number 5? But that's way too early to determine the outcome of that and if it was wise or not. But the Canadiens, we've discussed it at length, went for the rarity of that profile, being a rather big right-handed shot defenseman who's both intelligent, skilled, and very mobile. So he's got great tools, man. So I like that because I see Reinbacher, Hutson, and Mailloux, and I see 3 very, very different defensemen that you add to Goulet, you add to Jacky. Oof, that's 5 young defensemen that could really make for a great blue line. Plus Matheson. I mean, you could go down the list. I mean, I really like what I see from Jaden Struble too.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. But I think, I mean, that's the thing is that the Canadiens are going to trade a defenseman, and people are going to be upset because they're going to have to trade someone that people want, and everyone's assuming, oh, just trade Justin Barron or trade Jordan Harris.
Yeah.
But I think the level of nasty in Struble and just kind of that element of him and it's just you know, I like Jaden Struble too, but I think a lot of teams around the league took a liking to Jaden Struble last season. Yeah. So it's a possibility there. All right. So that's our top 10.
So if you listen to us on YouTube, you can why don't you leave us your top 10? We might have ignored some names or guys that say, well, how come you don't have this guy or that guy in your top 10? Well, write your own top 10 in the comments. Will be I know I'm going to read them. I don't know about Arpon, but I know I will. So
I read the comments. What are you talking about? I read the comments. I do.
You made a point earlier in the season and said that you did not read the comments.
I don't obsess over them. I do look at them every now and then, though. I do, absolutely.
Fine. All right, time for the mailbag.
Let's hit it. We do a mailbag every Monday, you know?
Let's go to the mailbag. Let's go to the mailbag.
Mailbag.
You know, they reach out and they write to us.
Okay, so meaty mailbag again this week. Thanks to everybody for sending us your questions, both on Twitter at Basu and Godin, and also on our email at our email address, which is basuandgodin@gmail.com. So let's get started. We have first of all a question here from
I got it. So
you got it. Thank you.
We got a question here from
from
Jake Mack. Yeah. Jake Mack on X asks, inspired off the old Marc Bergevin adage, there are players that get you to the playoffs and players that get you through the playoffs. Who are the guys on the roster right now to get you through the playoffs, and who's one they could add? For example, I think of Sam Bennett. Now, I think the example is Sam Bennett is a guy that gets you through the playoffs, not a guy they could add. Another one I would add from these playoffs is Barclay Goodrow, who's showing it again that come playoff time, you need a guy like that. The guy has more playoff goals than he had regular season goals. So
that's crazy, huh?
Yeah. 6 goals in the playoffs, 4 goals in the regular season. So on the roster right now, and okay, in my opinion, to me, we've seen it. Saw it. It was 3 years ago now, but Josh Anderson in the playoffs is a guy who helps get you through the playoffs. Doesn't even have to score, doesn't have to do a whole lot, but he has an impact on games when you're playing him repeatedly 5, 6, 7 times in a row. He gets in defensemen's heads when they're going back for pucks. He has, and this is why, and we have a question on Josh Anderson, so I'm not going to go too deep on it. But to me, when scouts look at Josh Anderson and get intrigued by him, that's what they think. They think that's a guy I would like to have in a playoff series. That's a guy I would like to make sure is just pounding the opposing team's defense with that speed and the ability to pop some goals every now and then. But, you know, I think he's a guy. Playoff Josh Anderson is frankly a big reason why I thought the Canadiens should have traded him last year, because I think there were a lot of playoff teams who were looking at Josh Anderson and said that's kind of the element we need on our team, and Canadiens have that. So it's right now having that seems like a bad thing because he had such a terrible season. But to me, he's that type of guy.
Yeah. I think that in due time, Kirby Dach will be a guy that gets you through the playoffs. I think Slav is going to be a guy that gets you through the playoffs too.
But he'll also get you to those guys will also get you to the playoffs.
Yeah. But I mean, guys that you can, we've seen in Montreal players, let's say like Philippe Danault or Thomas Plekanec, who got you to the playoffs. But because of the weakness of the matchups, their responsibilities made it so that they could not produce offensively in the playoffs and were basically reduced to playing defensive roles. I don't know if it's the fate that awaits Nick Suzuki, for example, I don't know, but I'm looking at the bigger guys as the ones who can really thrive in the playoffs. So Slav, Doc, I think that Caden Gooley also on defense will be a guy that I would expect to have a
He's
bigger
got to
impact
survive
in the
though.
playoffs.
He's got to survive physically. That's the only question I have with him. He's got to get through the playoffs. To get the Canadiens through the playoffs, he has to get through the playoffs. So
yes, that's true. But I mean, I'm more like for the playoffs. I'm more concerned about a guy like Cole Caulfield, for example. Would he be able to really find his way?
Yeah, I see. Watching him in 21, I mean, yes, maybe that was just a one-off, but that was a long run, and he remained effective more or less throughout until they ran into Tampa. He was effective. So
yeah, but those were different playoffs, man.
Hey, I know people discredit that, but they played a very strong Jets team, a very strong Leafs team, a very strong Jets team, and they played Vegas. And Vegas was not exactly the Vegas that won the Cup, but built similarly at the time. Like, they were a very strong team that they beat and got through.
Yeah, no, from that point on, I agree with you. But you know what? I don't want to digress too long on that, but it's just that the playoff atmosphere is, in part at least, what you see in the building, what you hear in the building, what you feel is
they had that
the
in
playoff
Vegas.
atmosphere.
They had it in Vegas.
Yeah,
it was a full building.
They didn't have it in the first two rounds of the playoffs, and in half of the games in Montreal, there was 3,000 people by then inside the Bell Center.
I don't know. I don't think a big crowd would scare Cole Caulfield personally, but
no. But what I mean is that it galvanizes everybody, and it
was a full building.
Up everybody.
Yeah, I understand, and I thought he responded to that. I don't know. I think the whole team responded to that. It was even more striking for them because those games in Vegas were their first games in front of a crowd.
Yeah,
in a long ass time. And they didn't wilt under that. I mean, like, I thought Suzuki was good and Caulfield was good. Like, all their young guys, that was what was most encouraging. Kyle KK was even good. I mean, it was really
even KK.
Even KK was good. So, anyhow, so that's that. So, actually, speaking of Cole Caulfield, it kind of segues nicely into the next question, which comes from I don't even know who this comes from.
Oh, it's Loic.
Oh, it's
Loic. From Loic. Yeah.
Loic. Quelles informations vous retenez des prestations des joueurs du Canadien lors du championnat du monde de hockey? Quick translation. What information did you glean off the performance of Canadiens players at the World Hockey Championships? I will let you go.
Well, first, overall, it was not an overly satisfying and very enthusiastic World Championships from the Canadiens' point of view. I think that Slavkovsky wished he could have done more over there. I think that he put a lot of pressure on himself, obviously being the star player for Slovakia. I find that him in particular, he could have produced more, but I found that there were many games where he created chances that the other two guys on his line just couldn't bury or couldn't finish. It was really a case, we were talking about Hutson earlier and playing in the American League where he would do plays that, would he have talented enough players to play with in the American League, where there were some occasions where Slav would make plays, and if he had more talented line mates, this would have been a more significant scoring chance at least. So, but ultimately, I mean, that he feels that, as the leader that he's become, even at a young age, he's become a leader for that team, and I think that he wishes he had done more. I think that it remains a fairly satisfying tournament for him. Definitely satisfying for Kapanen. Gooley was seen favorably, as he's always been, by Coach André Tourigny, who's coached him in the past in the Team Canada program. It's unfortunate that he missed the last game because of a wrist injury. He blocked a shot in the semifinal game against Sweden, so he could not play.
Switzerland.
Against Switzerland, so he could not play against Sweden. And as for Caulfield, I mean, he was in a situation where I think that he had to make a case for himself preparing for the Four Nations tournament and the Olympics. Obviously, he still has plenty of time to make that case, but I don't see him having gained any points in that tournament. One of the guys that he'll be one of his competitors for a potential spot on the American team is Matthew Boldy, and Boldy really stood out for the U.S. and Caulfield did not. I mean, he had a great game against Latvia, and he put up. You look on paper, it looks as though he's made a lot of points, but not really when it mattered the most. Not against the premier opponents. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you could say that about Team USA in general. I mean, that team on paper had no reason to not be in the gold medal game. I thought they were the favorite. I mean, them and Sweden, I thought were the two favorites in the tournament based on their rosters. But yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think Caulfield's performance was inconsistent. And I would agree on Gouli and obviously Kapanen. The one thing with Slav, we were just talking about getting through the playoffs. Like Slav performing the way he did in that environment, you know, the fact that Slovakia was in Ostrava and not Prague, I'm sure those fans would have made their way to Prague anyway, but still, is that much closer to Slovakia.
That's a 4-hour drive from his home.
That's it. So basically turned Ostrava into a Slovak town for that period of time. So yeah, having him perform in that environment with literally the pressure of his entire country on him and largely him. I mean, really, the fate of the Slovak team appeared to be resting on his shoulders more than any other player, and he's 20. So I thought he handled that pretty well. We got an idea of when he was joking when he left, how he doesn't find the media pressure to be all that bad. And he said, "Oh, you want to see media come to Slovakia?" And we got a glimpse of it. You know, it was like, that's what he lives every day. So, yeah, this one's a bit more of a complicated question, but we're going to try to tackle it to some extent. Hey guys, since your now weekly podcast is only checks notes 90 minutes, I have to listen to other NHL content. On the SXM network the other day, there was a discussion of Tampa Bay's trade for Ryan McDonagh and the cap hit impact on now re-signing Steven Stamkos. Broadcast touched on it briefly, but there was a mention of TB acquiring LTIR money, and Carey Price's name was obviously mentioned as a way Tampa could free up enough cap space to sign Stamkos for what it will likely take to keep him. Can you explain how that might work for Tampa? And if it does, wouldn't that also help the Canadiens? Thanks. Love the show. Matt Crawford from Winooski, Vermont. So I was told there would be no LTIR questions for the rest of my life.
Too late.
Yeah.
There are still some. So 2 more years of that, man.
Now, there is some precedent for Tampa Bay doing this. However, this is the important part of it is that it's not as simple as acquiring LTIR space. I can't explain it all that well, but it's not that simple. When the Lightning went out and acquired Brent Seabrook, the most important part of that deal was sending the Blackhawks Tyler Johnson's contract at $5 million a year. Yes, they were able to put Seabrook on LTIR, but shedding that contract was the key component of that whole deal. And probably had a bigger impact on Tampa's finances than adding Seabrook. Adding Price's contract would create LTIR space in theory, but in practicality, it would be complicated. There would probably be some money coming back. And frankly, looking at Tampa's ledger, they don't have a Tyler Johnson anymore. There's no real player that they need to shed that makes too much money. As a matter of fact, they're in a situation where they don't want to shed any of those guys. They believe their window is still open. It's debatable. I would argue that but the situation that they're in is that they can't start preparing for the window being closed because they're so all in on this window. And so you might as well try and extract every last drop of it that you can. So I've asked some people about trading Carey Price's contract so that a team can use the LTIR to go over the cap by X number of dollars. And we all know Tampa did that when they won the Stanley Cup with Kucherov. So it's not that simple. It would create some headaches. They can only exceed the cap by 10% in the offseason. Price's contract alone is higher than is well above 10% of the cap. So it creates a very complicated situation for them to manage. Anything's possible, but it's not as simple as just adding Carey Price and throwing him an LTIR and then signing Stamkos. It's not that simple.
In order to put a guy on LTIR, in order to put a guy on LTIR, he needs to fit on your roster under your cap at first. So that's
under the 10% threshold that exists
in the summer.
Yeah,
exactly. So let's say it's at 87.7% for the upcoming season. So 10% threshold. That brings a summer cap of $96.4 million. So you would have the Tampa Bay Lightning would need to put Price under that a cap of 96.4, and I guess after that they could sign,
even if it's for like a minute.
Yeah, and after that they could sign Stamkos. They could have a handshake deal and say, you know what, wait until after July. And after July 1st, and we'll be okay. Or after we've acquired Carey Price, but it's really difficult. I think it was designed to be an almost immovable contract. Not to mention, and I'm not positive about that, but there used to be a time where at least one season where Carey Price's bonus was given to him in September. That was in 2021. Now, I don't know if every year since then it's also been in September, or if it was if it's been adjusted to July 1st, like the vast majority of the players who receive their bonuses. So maybe if it goes back to July 1st, maybe that a way to have it done would tell the Canadiens to pay that bonus on July 1st, and then we can discuss. That's possible. But the second part of the question was to say, well, what's in it for the Canadiens? I don't think that they would get much of an asset in return if they were to, quote unquote, help the Lightning. But any team would rather not work in LTIR and be in a possibility where they can accrue cap space and they can just have all of their flexibility. Plus, the Canadiens, when you look at their cap right now and their salary, not requirements, but the schedule of their, what they'll have to pay in the next couple of years. They're not in an absolute emergency where they need every bit of that LTIR money. So, but it's a rock in the shoe to a certain extent. To any team, LTIR is sometimes it's a lesser evil, but it remains an evil. So if you can work without it, you do that. So I guess that would be the part where the Canadiens, if they could manage to move his contract, they would do it. And I know that Carey would not be opposed to it at all.
No, he's on record saying that anything the Canadiens need, he'd be happy to. He wouldn't block it with his no movement clause. But yeah, it's honestly again. I was told there'd be no more LTIR questions, but it's not as simple. It's not as simple as and you said the contract was designed to be immovable. LTIR as a system was designed to be so complicated that teams would not be incentivized to intentionally go into LTIR. I really think that's why the system is so opaque and just heavy, is that they didn't want to make it so that LTIR would be pleasant, so that teams could just start adding injured players and spend 30, 40 million above the cap. There are mechanisms in place that make it far more complicated. It's it's been explained to me in the past. I don't feel comfortable enough explaining it right here, but just to say that it's not as simple as just adding Carey Price and saying, "Oh, look, we can go 10.5 million over the cap now." It's not that easy. And frankly, Tampa would have the same issue as Montreal had, where they would likely have to put Carey Price on off-season LTIR. It would lock them into a cap figure. Yes, they could fit Stamkos under that, but then every summer they'd have to do the same dance and do this. And it's just like every summer. It'd be one more summer where they'd have to do that. So yeah, not super complicated.
All right, Matthew from Toronto is asking us, does Nick Bobrov from the scouting staff and Habs management have a bias or preference towards taking European players playing in Europe higher in the draft? I have found it curious that this regime's first three first-round picks were all European. If you go back to Gorton and Bobrov with the New York Rangers as well and look at the combined totals between 2017 and 2020 and 22-23 in Montreal, 8 of 11 first-round picks were players playing in Europe at the time of the draft. So that's 73%. Over that span, only approximately 34% of all players drafted in the first round were from European leagues. So it's an interesting observation, Matthew. Let's not forget that Nick Bobrov, when he was working for Jeff Gorton in New York, was not the director of scouting at large. He was director of European scouting. So there was a co-director. It was almost the same way of working. That's what we see right now in Montreal. But he was director of European scouting. So I think that he's developed. Sometimes guys that work in an area, they will develop their contacts and their ways to get additional information. So maybe that if you feel as though other teams don't have as much information in certain areas on certain prospects, the fact that you feel as though you have more information can make you feel more comfortable in making picks that other teams would be hesitant to do. So that's a possibility in my view.
Yeah, and one of the things that Matthew mentions is, basically, and just to really kind of spell it out so that people understand what Matthew's talking about. You look at it. So in 2017, they took Philip Hedl at 21. They also took Elias Anderson at 7, who's obviously with the Laval Rocket right now, or is for now at least. 2018, they had 3 first-round picks. At number 9, they took Vitaly Kravtsov out of Russia. 22, they took Keandre Miller out of Wisconsin, or out of the U.S. National Development Team program. And at 28, they took Nils Lundqvist out of Sweden, who now who's now employed by the Stars.
Employed.
Yeah. 2019, Capo Caco at number 2, and I think even Matt mentions in this question, that was a no-brainer. Any team in the league would have taken Capo Caco at number 2 that year. 2020, Lafreniere at number 1, same deal. Every team would have taken him. But at 19, they took Braden Schneider out of the WHL. Then obviously for the Canadiens, it's Reinbacher at 5, Slavkovsky at 1, and Philip Meshar at 26. And so the point Matthew's making, and actually kind of a side question or a follow-up question to this is, he asked, perhaps they prefer drafting players who've had experience playing / performing against men, which is more common in Europe. I believe that was the rationale for Uri and David Reinbacher, and you're not wrong on that, Matthew. So he said, if you believe there's a preference there, is there anyone outside of Demidov that would fit that bill in this year's draft that Habs fans should consider as an outside shot for number 5? And on that case, unless they go with one of the defensemen, and again, we had a lot of questions this week saying would the Canadiens consider a defenseman? I think they would if the draft falls a certain way that it's not likely to fall, but you never know. But I think it would take one of those defensemen. I don't think there's a forward. I don't think they're taking Konsta at number 5. That's my read of that. And that's, other than him, there's some Russian prospects who are also kind of projected to go in the teens, but not many forward prospects out of Europe this year that I think the Canadiens would consider at that spot. If they draft a defenseman, then yeah, it's very possible they draft a European. If Anton Salayev is available at number 5,
Well, that's pretty much the only one, right?
Well, if Levshunov's available, I mean, he's
Yeah, but Levshunov is
Yeah.
still is in the NCAA.
yeah, he's still European. I mean, I don't know. He's not playing in Europe, right? So
No.
yeah, so really Salayev would be the one guy that maybe, but I think even then, I think there'd be a heavy, as we mentioned in a previous episode, it would be a heavy debate, and I don't know if the people who would win that debate are the people who have the power to make that decision. So we would see, but yeah, it's. I don't think there's a forward that outside of Davidov that the Canadiens would take out of Europe.
No. Robert
Good
Fillon.
question. Good question, though, Matthew.
It is a good question.
Yes.
Good research too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robert Fillon is asking us, is the good production of Brendan Gallagher at the end of the season the result of his good play, or more the fact that he is playing with Alex Newhook, who's the closest version of Philippe Danault, being a good skater, a north-south player with intense forecheck? First, I'm not sure if I would agree with the premise that Newhook is necessarily the closest version to Philippe Danault. I mean, Danault was a much more accomplished defensive player and a guy who was extremely smart in transition. Newhook is a great skater who can carry the puck in transition, but in terms of the give and go aspect and the counter attack from the defensive zone to the offensive zone, which is, I think, where Danault was its most effective. I see differences between the two. But I think that Gallagher having a speedy guy next to him for sure helped. But I think that we should not discard the fact that he really finished on a good note based on his own merit. I think that Gallagher put in a lot of work this season, and he finished by doing what he knows best, which is crashing the net. But it's also making sure that he's there at the right time, which he seemed like he was not anymore. And at the end of the season, it seems as though that his timing had come back, and the fact that he could read the play and say, oh, this is the right time to be there, go now. And then he was there right on time. I think that just putting it on his line mates would be unfair to Brendan.
I would just kind of say that I don't think Robert's saying that Alex Newhook is Philippe Danault. I think his point is valid that he has some of those similar traits and doesn't do it at the same level as him, obviously, or yet, I should say. But it's true that he likes carrying the puck from blue line to blue line. It's true that he's a good skater. It's true that he's a north-south player. His forechecking is not at the same level of Danault, but he is a decent forechecker. I mean, I think stylistically, his point has some merit that you found a stylistically similar player to the player that he had the most success with in his career. And I think there's some merit to that. But the reality is that whether it was Newhook or not, like, Brendan Gallagher's not likely to play with Alex Newhook again. Like, I just, unless Alex Newhook is the third line center on this team, which I don't think the Canadiens would prefer. I think they'd like to see him as a top six winger for as long as Kirby Dach is healthy. And I don't think Brendan Gallagher is going to play on a top six wing spot. So, but your point is valid that he deserves credit. His strong finish this season was on merit and stayed healthy all year, which is a big thing. And, but yeah, we'll see. And you know what? Down the road, we were talking about Owen Beck earlier.
Yeah.
That could be a guy that Gallagher could play with. Maybe a couple of years from now. Not next year, but maybe the year after. I don't know.
Gallagher and Beck?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could be. Yeah. And he has some of those similar traits. You know, he's a pretty good skater. He's got a shot, forechecks, does all those things. So we'll see. But that's a good observation, Robert. I really I like that. But it's
one thing's for sure: any centerman is better for Brendan Gallagher than Christian Dvorak.
Yes,
that's the one.
who honestly,
the one
all
no
things-
when it comes to
Yeah, well-
line.
watch what happens.
I know,
Watch what happens.
I know.
Watch what happens. It's just like the one centerman for Josh Anderson is not Nick Suzuki, and yet we saw it
that
at the
could happen
it's
again,
first game of the season last year. Josh Anderson is playing with Nick Suzuki. Everyone and their mother knew that would not work, and it shockingly did not work. And so we'll see. But the way things are playing out, unless they can move Dvorak, he's probably penciled in as their third line center next year, and Gallagher's probably going to be on his wing.
All right, prefer Gallagher playing with Evans then.
Yeah, I would too.
At least there's, here's a guy. Evans is not. He was not as good. He's not as good as Dano, but stylistically, they're not that different.
No,
They're just not the same level, the two of them. But stylistically, they're.
Yeah, I don't think he has the puck carrying acumen that Dano. Like that aspect of Dano is not with him. He looks to move the puck in the neutral zone as opposed to go blue line to blue line with it.
Yeah.
A little bit more than Dano did, at least. But that's why I see the similarity between Newhook and Dano. Is Newhook gets the puck through the neutral zone pretty efficiently and effectively, the way Phil did and does still to this day on a pretty good contract.
All right, let's wrap it up. Oh my God, that contract. Okay, so that's another long episode. You know what, Arpon? I realized that since we do it once a week, and Matthew from Toronto was right to point it out. Our episodes run longer since we get to talk to each other.
No, it's not Matthew from. It was Matt from Vermont. Two Matts from Winooski, Vermont. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Winooski, Vermont. Oh yeah, just north of Burlington. There you go. So we tend to run long. But that's okay. We're fine.
Well, you have all week to listen to it. You don't have to listen to it all at once. Listen to it over the course of the week. It's fine.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next Monday.